bougie, so you can't say it and make me mad.
ATL! ATL!
Rise up, A-Town. It's the Falcon Squad. Sponsored by Gametime. Everything Atlanta Falcons every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from the ATL. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Straight from the ATL, the Falcon Squad Show starts now.
Welcome to the Falcon Squad Show, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Falcons analyst Jarvis Davis and Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman. And we've got a few words from our senior Falcons reporter, Tori McElhaney, who is on site right now as training camp continues in Flowery Branch. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, our Falcons Football Squad show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Falcons get more deep as we get deeper into training camp. We'll discuss, and should the Falcons go for all the marbles with another 11? We'll download on that. Also, one thing about the Falcons, they're going to do good things in the community. We'll talk about it. But first, let's talk about the good on both sides of the ball. So speaking of Tori, she did tweet out something that I thought was interesting. And I think you guys feel much the same, that when you look at this year's training camp, there's more of that back and forth between the offense and defense than maybe we've seen in recent memory. So Jarvis, you might see like one day it's, hey, offense wins. Free, you might see the next day defense wins. And I think that's a good thing. But I wanted to ask you guys, Aaron, even with those early returns, how do you think that shows us some tangible ways of the potential for this Falcons team to be good on both sides of the ball?
Well, I think it goes back a little bit to one of the things that we observed, at least in the first half of last season, where when the Falcons would have a down game, they usually responded in a positive way the following week. And that was a sort of a trend that was a big contributing factor to why this team got off to such a good start with that 6-3 start, where they had some rough outings in that first 9 games, but typically followed it up with, a sort of strong response. And I think you're seeing that sort of character carry over into this season for this team, where one day it is kind of a back and forth with the offense and defense, where it's the offense has a good day and then the defense follows that up with responding, and you're seeing the coaching staff in a lot of ways challenging both sides, being like, hey man, they got you on Thursday or they got you on Saturday, what are you going to do the next time the Falcons go out? And I think that's something that you hope to see continue this upcoming season. Obviously last year with the promising start, and then it stopped for a variety of reasons that we can leave behind in 2024. But you hope that trend continues. Like there's going to be some down games for the Falcons. They're not going to play, we can hope otherwise, but chances are they're not going to play 17 great games this upcoming season. And so a lot of their success is going to be that ability to respond the following week, fix the problems that occurred on the previous Sunday, if that led to the loss, and even the games where they win, but it was not necessarily the prettiest win. Can they, respond to that in a positive way? And so I think the character that they're kind of showing through this first phase of training camp of this back and forth could pay off in that way this upcoming season.
Yeah, and I like something that you mentioned there, Free, just to kind of add to that, and that is that at the end of the day, you're not going 17-0 in all likelihood. So there may be situations where you find yourselves maybe taking an L and you have to bounce back quickly because there's a major matchup the next week, whether it's one of the top teams in the league and you want to show that you belong, or whether that's a critical divisional matchup and you can't afford to drop 2 games in a row with that kind of looming overhead. So yeah, these are the types of situations where you go back and forth, you win one day, you lose the next, and how do you respond? And that can translate into the regular season. Jarvis, would you agree?
Absolutely, because I think one of the things that when you think about teams, certain sides of the ball, like going back and forth as far as, hey, they got it the best of this day, they got it the best of that day. And I think that, like Aaron mentioned, like it's a great ability to practice getting punched in the mouth, right? So, there are, there's segments of those of the team that come together on Sundays and play, and you're able to, maybe the offense had a down day, or the defense had a down day, or the special teams, and the special team was rolling. So, you know what to do to be able to go back and try to correct those things. But I think as far as them going back and forth and kind of, making sure that the coaches are emphasizing that, hey, these guys got the best of you. I think that's kind of like an iron sharpen iron type thing. And then when I think about a great example of that was when Drake London was talking to AJ Terrell before practice, and AJ Terrell's like, hey man, I got to come see you today. He's like, yeah, let's do it. And that's the type of thing that you say, hey, that's CB1 and wide receiver one right there having a conversation like, hey man, we're going to go at it today. So let's go get this. Let's get better. And when you have, and it creates a culture of guys, it's a trickle down effect. Like, and when you have guys like a rookie seeing that, or undrafted rookie seeing that, like, oh, these guys got to go at it. So I got to make sure I'm on point too. So I think when you have guys like that establishing that type of mindset it definitely transfers on the field time and time again.
Yeah. And speaking of the field, and we'll talk more about this Thursday as we do our kind of keys to the game ahead of the first preseason matchup, which will be, of course, against the Detroit Lions. But you start thinking about, okay, granted, all that we said, we're going to see it in practices. We hope to see it in joint practices, but don't know how it's going to quite translate in terms of preseason games. We'll see, because you may actually see a little bit more of the youth than you think. So let me go in two directions. And of course, like I said, our girl, Tori McElhaney, is on site right now, giving us some real-time updates that we want to share with you guys as well, and kind of share Jarvis and Aaron's thoughts with you all on it. And that is talking about that Friday game that Raheem Morris did confirm that certainly he'll know more about who's playing in that game after the team scrimmage come Wednesday. So again, we'll give you a reaction to that Thursday as well. But he did kind of give us a nugget, Aaron. He said that because of the youth on the roster, that the expectation even now is to see more individuals play in the preseason than last year. So is that encouraging to you, just in terms of who you might see on the field? Let's take away the QB position for a second. Let's talk about every other position on the field, who we might see on the field. And going back to that iron sharpens iron and good on good, then maybe you will get to see a little bit more of these guys in the preseason.
Yeah, it is encouraging, because I was worried that some of these rookies would not see action on Friday that I think really need to see action, and some of the second and third year players that I also think need to see action. But I honestly went back and looked it up to see, like, when I heard Raheem Morris say that more guys are going to play, I'm like, is that really true? Because I went back to last year, and in that first Miami game, they played about 65 of their 91 guys in their that first preseason game. And so I'm just going through the depth chart, and I wound up counting 23 guys on the Falcons roster currently that I'm like, I know this guy's not playing. So you do the math, it's like, okay, that gets us to 68. So I'm just like, is Raheem being real technical here and be like, hey, we had 65 guys play last year in the first preseason game. We might get to 67 this year, and that's more, And it's
right.
like, okay,
exactly.
all right, touche, Raheem, so more guys will play. But I hope what it means is, rather than what we saw kind of in that first preseason game last year, where a lot of the guys that we knew were going to make the roster, the Eddie Goldmans, those types of guys, came in, basically played a series, and then they were like, all right, you're done. We don't need to see you the rest of the preseason. And so my hope is that we're not going to see a similar thing, where we're going to see an extended opportunity for some of these guys to get multiple series in this game. And if and then Raheem does the thing that he probably winds up doing, and then pulling the hook on those guys for subsequent preseason games, we'll be like, oh, we got 30 snaps of these guys. We're not going into the season with just 5 snaps for these guys that probably is not really doing anything to get these, to move the needle in that regard. So that's the encouraging part, where it's like, maybe it's not the actual number of guys that play more, but it's just the guys that play get more snaps.
Yes.
Makes sense.
Yeah, because it's quantity and quality. Yep, I hear you.
And I think I think Raheem has been listening to to the pod. You know what I'm saying? He even listened to the Falcon Squad show. I mean, who I've been a big proponent of. Hey, man, you're going to have to play these guys because you got so many young people that are going to play. You have to get some of these guys real game experience because guys like Braylon Trice, I know that he got hurt in the preseason last year, but he gonna have to test that bad boy out. He gonna have to see. He gonna have to crank that dog on, crank that. I can't even think of a luxury car to call him because I don't want nobody to get too big of an idea of how I feel about him. But I think he's a guy that I do like, and I feel like in order for them to get a good grasp of where he fits in this rotation that's really deep, you got to give him some real game experience against somebody that he doesn't know their tendencies, right? So, because, you know, you go against your teammate for so long in a training camp, it's just like, all right, I know exactly what he's going to do on this particular play. I got a good idea what they're running, so I know there's going to be a quick set, or so I know what to do on this particular play. So I think this is going to be interesting, and I think once these joint practices start to crank up, I think that we're going to really get a good idea of like where these guys are. And I'm glad that he's already in that mindset right now for against the Lions.
Yeah, except not in the mindset, Aaron, as it relates to his QB1 nor 2, because Tori also shared with us that Rock confirmed neither Michael Penix Jr. nor Kirk Cousins will play in this first preseason game. You good with that? Mostly for MPX. That's really what we're talking about.
I mean, I've made peace with it. So, yeah, sure. You know, like, would I like to see Michael Penix play some snaps? Yes. But I understand that if you put Michael Penix out there, you don't want to put him out there behind the second string offensive line. So you got to play your starting offensive line. And so then you're increasing the injury risk for those guys. And you know, the Falcons offensive line, as we've talked about before in previous squad shows, you know, they really need their offensive line to stay healthy this year in order to reach their ceiling as an offense. And so I get it. So it's a snowball effect where it's like, well, if we play Penix, we got to play these guys. And so I get it. You're going to just not play him, and that's fine. You know, we'll see if he gets off to a slow start against Tampa Bay in week 1, then we'll be like, I wonder if he would have, you know, that whole thing that always comes up every single year. But Raheem has made his bed. He's trusting in his ability to get these guys ready. And so ultimately we will either be like, hey, Raheem was right, or we'll be like, Raheem, I don't know. Maybe you should change some things. But we won't really know that until September 7th.
So true.
Yeah. And I think it's I will always stand my ground. Like, you don't get better by playing football by osmosis. It just doesn't happen. Like, you get better by playing it. You get better by getting that continuity or building that continuity with your wide receivers and that timing, because the big thing coming in for him last year was that, he didn't get any reps with the ones and I mean, he's in a lot of practice reps with those guys. But again, just like I mentioned earlier with some of these guys on the defense side of the football, like, he still needs to get some live game action, because guess what? He's not getting hit in practice. He doesn't have any trash or whatever around his feet. He doesn't necessarily have to worry about that for the most part, because if you touch the quarterback, he's probably going to get cut. You know, so I think that in order to take that level of comfort, you know, out from a practice standpoint, give him a series at some point. And I don't care what game it is, give him a series or 2 at some point during the preseason. I feel like, just to kind of get the rust off a little bit, because we saw how Kirk struggled in that first game last year, and he's been in the league forever. You know what I'm saying? So I think, you know, I know Rod's not going to do it. I know he's not going to play him.
Despite listening to us, he won't listen to that part, right?
Yeah, he won't listen to that part. He's going to ignore me on that one. He's probably going to put me on mute for a second every time I start talking about it. But I think there is something to say about taking that, I'm not going to get hit, taking that out of it. Like, yeah, you folks trying to get to you. So you better get rid of that rock, you know, get that clock right.
Yeah. I'm interested to see, to your point about whether or not getting the reps for our young guys, for the Falcons young guys, rather, if that is more important, or if safety is kind of paramount. No pun intended, because Raheem Morris also said, hey, we'll be working Jalen Walker, we'll be working Xavier Watts back in, but didn't make any definitive comments on whether or not we'll see them this Friday. So, hey, we'll keep you guys posted.
They're going to spin the block on that Lamborghini. I'm telling you, T. They're going to spin the block on that one. They have to. I lose my mind if they don't. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say it may right, and like you said, it may not be this week. We don't know which week it is, but you almost kind of have to have that. And maybe he alluded to it by saying they're working them back in. They've got the practice Wednesday, if you will, and then you've got ultimately 3 games to kind of decide where you want to work him in, where you kind of feel best, or work both of them in the preseason to really get those young guys, as Rob mentioned, kind of ramped up for that critical first game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the Falcons, they got more deep, and they're getting deeper as we get into training camp. So we'll talk about that when we take it under further review. This episode of our Falcons Squad show is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're seeking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Let's be honest. Some days on the course or even off of it, again, if we're being honest, you just need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. So what's the weirdest course you've ever played? Did it have any odd challenges that really threw you off your game? Or maybe a fun course and it was so fun that you spent all your energy on the front 9, and then on the back 9, it was like, oh man, I'm trying to tap out. Well, you don't have to do that when you have 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. Golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors like what Transfusion brings. That grape, ginger, lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse to go without chasing down that beverage cart. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. Now, this offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. So whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need. Order Transfusion flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. So Jarvis, I want to go back to the quarterbacks. We do have confirmation from Raheem Morris, again, that neither MPX nor Kirko will take the field come Friday. Now, you mentioned something of an osmosis. You said, hey, at the end of the day, it's about more than osmosis if you want these football players to be ready for football. But can that preparation, that readiness for game 1 still on some level be there if there's help for MPX for the season to kind of keep things positive in the quarterback room as well? And what I'm alluding to is that tweet that you mentioned that Torrey said about TJ Yates, of course, the pass game coordinator, who says he and the QB coach, DJ Williams, sometimes they just kind of sit back and listen to the two QBs, and they like the fact that there's a relationship that's developing there. I mean, no, it's not them on the field, but could it help in terms of QB room cohesion? And could it still help Michael Penix Jr. to somewhat get ready for this season?
Absolutely. It's definitely a part of it because here's the thing. There are things that Kirk can see based off of his experience in the NFL and what he's been through that MPX just can't see. That's not a knock on MPX. It's just that the fact that he even played in the league for 10 plus years. You know what I'm saying? So we think about it from that aspect. There are things that Kirk is going to be able to see and be able to tell him, or as he's sitting there on the sidelines, or as he's going through that film session and they're sitting there like talking through it. It's just a beautiful thing. It goes back to the iron sharpen iron thing too. Each one teach one. That's one of the things that we kind of went by as far as when I played in college. Like my defense coordinator, he didn't teach really the entire defense. Like he went over it. Don't get me wrong. And let everyone know what the basis of it was, but it was up to the older heads who were in their positions to kind of say, okay, here's what he means when he says this, or here's what he means when he's talking about this particular coverage or this particular stance this offensive lineman is in that he's trying to explain to you, so kind of give you some keys what to look for. So I think that's if you're hearing that they're having those type conversations where the coaches are just sitting back and kind of letting it breathe a little bit, that can help MPX tremendously, because there are still I know I'm one of those people that feel like he's going to have some success in his league, but there are still going to be some things or some times where he's going to need that extra eyeball or extra set of eyes that's not a coach to kind of say, hey, man, here's what they're doing on third down. They did it last time. This is something you should be looking for as you come up to the line of scrimmage in that particular situation again.
Yeah, I think, obviously Kirk has a ton of experience and, has been through a ton of different offenses over the course of his NFL career. A lot of them similar, but, every offensive coordinator has their different quirks and how they sort of teach things. And obviously Kirk has done a lot of trial and error when it's come to playing the quarterback position, sometimes at a high level, sometimes at not quite a high level throughout, the decade plus that he's been in the NFL. And that all that experience is very valuable to a young player like Michael Penix, just getting at the bare minimum, just perspectives on things, right? Where it's just like, okay, I see this coverage a certain way and I read it this way or whatever. And Kirk's like, oh, well, in 2019 with Gary Kubiak, we did it this way, or with Kevin Stefanski, we did it this way. Or Sean McVay taught me back in 2015 to do it this way. Or, Kyle Shanahan taught me in 2012, all those various things that Kirk can add to the equation that is going to give Michael Penix, a potential leg up when it comes to how he kind of, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, sort of responds to some of the challenges that are inevitably going to come. There are going to be defenses that are going to throw things at him that he hasn't seen before, right? That week 2 game against the Minnesota Vikings and Brian Flores. Like, I know Brian Flores was hoping that the Falcons benched Kirk Cousins a week or 2 earlier, just so he could get a rookie quarterback and be like, yeah, I got some blitzes. I got some blitzes I can throw at this guy. Let's see what he can do. And so now he's going to be probably in his bag to sort of see the many different ways. I'm sure he'll be taking things that Todd Bowles is going to be throwing at Michael Penix in that first game, because we know Todd Bowles is not a stranger to, pressure and blitzes and all that thing. So I think all of these things, all these conversations, this back and forth with Kirk and MPX is ultimately going to benefit Michael Penix in long ways. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he's going to be the guy that has to, face the fire, so to speak. But I do think, these conversations that he can have with Kirk Cousins does potentially give him a leg up. And, it goes back to the conversation, we were having back in June when, all the stuff with Caleb Williams and that coaching staff came out with the Chicago Bears, and they just kind of like, all right, Caleb, figure it out. And just kind of left the room and walked out. And it was just like, okay. And you look at what happened with the Chicago Bears this past year, you're like, yeah, totally makes sense based off of what we now know, what was going on behind the scenes there. And so, ultimately it's going to be Michael Penix that's going to have to make the throws and make the reads and go out there and win the football games. But at the very least, despite all the drama and the ongoing saga with Kirk Cousins and all that stuff, he has been put in a position, and this kind of illustrates it, where you should get the best version of Michael Penix coming out of the gates this upcoming season. And whatever that version is, obviously it will be determined by, his success and his team success and whatnot. But, I think these are all good things that are going to help Michael Penix not be hung out to dry ultimately. And we'll be able to sit here and say definitively, regardless of what the results of this upcoming season are, we got the best version of Michael Penix this past season because he was put in a position to succeed.
Yeah, indeed. And speaking of leg up, as Free mentioned a couple of times there, I'm going to go in a different direction with Friday's practice, because the Falcons ran some 2-minute drills. The first one ended in Younghoe Koo making a 54-yard kick. And that's why I wanted to go back to it, because it was interesting. Both Younghoe Koo and Craig, like, they both had 5 kicks, and both of them were able to successfully kick past 50 yards. So I want to give both of them credit for getting 3 kicks of 50 yards or more. But Jarvis, what was impressive for me with Koo is he actually made all 5 of his kicks. And the fact that he, with all of the struggles last year with kicking period, but definitely with the deeper balls, you got to be encouraged to see that he was able to make 3 of them past 50.
Absolutely. I mean, despite, Aaron wanted me to, acting like I wanted to kill Young Waku last year
Kill
after
Coop,
that Saints game,
not us, Jarvis,
I'm
not
not a
us.
violent person,
Mhm.
there is just a certain level of expectation that he has set based off his play that I'm used to.
Yeah.
And when I didn't see that, like it kind of evoked a different type of emotion in me. You know what I'm saying? Like
It did. It
it may
did.
or may not have come off in a normal Jarvis way, because I try to stay positive in life. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't need to add no negativity to it. But I am encouraged to see this type of kicking, because I actually got a chance to check him out. When they start doing some of those drills, and they have he and Craig going back and forth as far as the same distance and kicks and everything like that. To see him go perfect like that, it just lets me know that, hey, this man is healthy. Like, this is what I'm used to seeing. This is what I want to continue to see. Like, I don't care for a man losing his job, especially when he's done what he's done for this organization as a whole, and just special teams, period. Like, the Falcons have been really consistent in that camp. So, we're used to a certain thing when we used to the defense not getting to the quarterback. We're not used to that kickers doggone missing doggone field goals.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
to see him be back to that, at least in this moment, I feel like that's a really good sight to see.
Yeah, and I think that's what made it so difficult last season, because one thing we never talked about ad nauseum on any of our shows was challenges in the special teams department.
Yeah.
But last year we had that conversation way too often, and we had that conversation way too often about Young Waku. So yeah, I think that's going to be so critical, because Aaron, despite the fact that Jarvis expects this team to average 28 yards per game, and unless you're being creative, that's pretty much 4 touchdowns. There will be times where it might be 24 to 23, or it might be 27, because you're going to need Young Waku to come out there and kick that game-winning field goal, or you're going to need him to at least end the drive with the Falcons walking away with some points, right? So yeah, got to be good for you as well to see Young Waku looking like he's back to himself.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact stat, but I remember looking it up years ago, where based it off the average number of games that are decided by 3 points or less, like it's basically like your kicker is going to win or lose you like 4 games a year, basically. Like,
yep,
having some, that can kind of swing your season in a lot of ways, right? And unfortunately for the Falcons, for the first time in several years, it swung the wrong way for Young Waku, and it is good to see and hear that he's connecting on these longer kicks, because that has never really been the strength of Young Waku relative to other. Like, he's made tons of 50+ yard kicks throughout his career. He made a career long last year, I believe, of 58 early in the season. So it's not unheard of for him, but like historically, like he's always been anything inside 50, you knew was money. Outside of 50, it wasn't quite as consistent as it has been sort of under 50. And that was kind of the one area where I think Lenny Krieg could come in and sort of shine. And at least in the early returns on practice, was that he was connecting more on those 50+ yard kicks compared to Young Waku. And so to sort of see Koo be like, okay, like you might have gotten an early lead or whatever that led to people thinking, oh, watch out for Koo. It's like, look, I've done this for a long time. I know what I'm doing, and I'm slow and steady wins the race. It's like the tortoise and the hare sort of situation. So I feel like Young Waku has more than made up some of the ground that maybe it looked like he was losing early on in training camp. And we'll see if this continues, especially with some of these long field goals. And again, I think, T, you're right. That will really signal that, the health concerns of last year are well behind, because if as I said, like 50+ yarders are not an area of weakness for him, but just maybe not necessarily area of strength. And if he's consistently hitting those, that's telling you, okay, he's back to previous form.
Yeah. And when I think about it, and Jarvis, I'm of course teasing you, because you're right. Like, points are going to be at a premium, but I do think although it's going to be early return, so it might be a little bit challenging as far as where this defense is and where this offense is relative to the teams that the Falcons play the first couple of weeks. I think that the Falcons are going to show they can hang.
Yeah.
So honestly, it really is a situation where we may be talking about 24-23, or we might be talking about 31-28. That's still a good conversation. So I love the fact that he is showing us maybe that he's ready to go. But hey, worst case scenario, Craig did hit 3 out of 5, and he hit those 350s. So, and the funny thing is, dude missed, I think, a 46 and a 43. So you kind of have the juxtaposition of accuracy in Younghoe Koo in terms of what he's normally done versus Craig, who has the ability to really like kick that ball into next week. Now, we talked about the Falcons getting deeper, and we didn't quite get there to talk about whether or not one of their recent signings is actually going to pay dividends for depth. We can talk about it on the other side. This episode of our Falcon Squad show is brought to you by Gametime. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes that possible. So Gametime also makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Seat views, right in the app before you buy, so you know where exactly you'll sit. I think that's a good look. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download that Gametime app today. Last minute ticket prices, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, guys. So we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but we want to kind of touch on this real quick. The Falcons announced Saturday they signed former Texans and Eagles corner Grayland Arnold and released O-lineman Killian Zier in a corresponding move. Raheem Morris said the team was looking to add secondary depth. We got our girl Tori back with us. Of course, she is there on site for training camp. So appreciate you taking some time out to join us today, and just wanted to start with you to ask what your thoughts were about that depth signing.
Yeah, it was a signing. It was one of those like preseason camp signings that like you need depth, especially now that we kind of have more of an idea of potentially what the Falcons are looking to do in terms of who they want to play on Friday in the first preseason game. To me, it feels a bit like we're not going to get a lot of run with any of the older guys. Obviously, Kirk Cousins not playing, Michael Penix not playing.
Yes.
I imagine we'll see some of the rookies, albeit sparingly. So you need bodies, for lack of a better word. You need guys who can go out and you can field a team with, and who can kind of be these backup pieces that you hope, if you're these guys, can go out and put film in a preseason game to potentially get picked up on a practice squad somewhere. Like that's what these things are. That bottom part of the roster, of that 90-man roster, like churning. It's going to continue to do that until we even get to 53 cut downs. So in terms of this particular signing, I'll be completely honest. It's like, it's another one. It's another sign. It's another preseason signing. So we'll see kind of like how gameplay and how much the game day lineup looks come Friday. That's what I'm more interested in.
Yeah, I think it's a different world that we live in, Tori, now that you literally go from 90 to 53. So it's not like you have those increments of kind of cut downs where maybe previously this would have been a little bit more important. And I don't want to say it's not important, but you know what I mean? Like it would have had a different implication. Let's say it that way. Jarvis versus just, hey, that's another piece until we get to 53.
Yeah, when you think about if I think about a group on the defense side of the football, that if there was a major injury, let's just say God forbid, I don't even want to say it.
Don't
If
say it.
a starting corner gets hurt, and think about where you are from a cornerback standpoint, you got a lot of questions. I know a lot of people are counting on Billy Bowman to get a lot of run this year, and I'm one of those people, but he's still a rookie. And then you got D. Alford, who no one wants to play this year, and be it from a nickel standpoint. Then you got Clark Phillips, who's unproven. He's a guy that kind of been working. I know Rob mentioned that he was going to be working down the inside in the spring, but I've seen him on the outside quite a bit as well in training
To
camp.
that point, like, I don't think he's taken hardly any reps at nickel.
Mhm.
That he's been with the twos with Billy Bowman inside. Clark Phillips, there's not been a lot of cross training with him in the way that I think Raheem Morris originally set out the beginning of the year. I think Billy Bowman's addition to this roster changed that plan.
Yeah. And so I think that when you think about that aspect of it, a guy like Clark Phillips having to step in, potentially if one of the starters goes down, like, I think that this is definitely, like Tori mentioned, like a body signing. They need bodies because they don't need no one to get hurt, and that's in at first defense and that, like, those sub packages and everything going forward.
Yeah. When they signed Henry Black last week, and now the Grayland Arnold signing, I think Tori nailed it, where it's just like, this is a signing, right? And they need bodies. And like, I was doing the math last week when you looked at how many safeties were on the roster with Billy Bowman playing, if it's the assumption being that he's going to be exclusively as a cornerback. And we know Jesse Bates ain't playing in the preseason, even though Raheem hasn't technically told us that, but we know he's not. He ain't playing. And so you then basically had like 4 safeties until you brought in Henry Black. And you look at last summer where there were about 200 or so snaps for the entire defense across 3 preseason games. And with 2 safeties, that's about 400 snaps. And basically that would have meant before signing Henry Black and a similar situation with Grayland Arnold, like it would have meant that Jordan Fuller and Xavier Watts and Josh Thompson and DeMarco Helms would have each basically had to play 100 or so preseason snaps. And we know, like, that's way too much for what he's like 10, like that, maybe 10, maybe 20, and then pull the hook on these guys. So that's where these signings for Grayland Arnold and Henry Black, and probably we'll see some more in the subsequent weeks. We might, I think D-line is another position where once they kind of get a look at these young guys this week, they'll be like, okay, let's bring in some bodies to play out the rest of the preseason, because we're good to go on the Zach Harrisons and all those guys, and pulling the plug on those guys in the preseason. So it's one of those things where for these guys that are coming in, their goal is like, we just need to pop. We're going to get a lot of opportunities in these preseason games. If we can pop, that's going to give us a chance not only to potentially make the Falcons practice squad, but it also may give us a chance to get another opportunity with one of the other 31 teams elsewhere. And so there's an opportunity for these guys that are Grayland Arnold, where you sit there and you say, yeah, the chances of making the Falcons roster is very, very low, unless they really, really pop in a major way. But they still have, an outside chance at a practice squad. They still have, chances at, landing a job with other NFL teams, just because they're going to see a ton of snaps. Because, after a couple of drives, Raheem is going to be like, hey, let's get all the guys that we know are going to be here in September. Let's get them off the field so that we don't have to worry about them, getting injured or whatever. And so that, someone like a Grayland Arnold, this man might play 3 quarters on basically a week's worth of practice, in this first preseason game and in subsequent preseason games. So they will have plenty of opportunities to make plays if given that circumstance. But this is mostly just to get bodies so that they can keep these guys that we know are going to be here this regular season fresher and healthier.
And who you hope to see fresh and healthy throughout the entirety of 17 weeks and beyond too. So Now, Tori, I think we can all agree that James Pierce Jr. has been one of the defensive stars since the Falcons put the pads on. But Raheem Morris paid a high compliment to another camp standout in Xavier Watts. Ross said, quote, Watts is an adult. That's the easiest way for me to put it. There's not a lot of funny to him. He's got pro-like skills, also gets some first-team reps. He's able to be a leader. What do you like about what that signals about Watts and his performance so far this camp? What do you like about what that signals about what we might see this fall?
To me, I think it signals somebody who is a bit farther along than maybe even what coaches thought when they drafted him. This is a guy who, let's be real, he only played 2 collegiate seasons as a safety, and he didn't move to the position until right before his senior season. So this is someone who is fairly new to the position. Granted, he came on the scene just guns blazing, and he had a knack for finding the ball and being in the right place at the right time, and kind of using that football IQ to maybe make up for areas where, maybe he's not as fast as others. He's not as long as others. And I think that speaks to also the reason why a lot of people were comping him to Jesse Bates, because Jesse Bates, there you won't find a smarter safety. And so the fact that Raheem, and I think Jesse too, when we talked to him on Thursday about Xavier Watts, was that he's in a good spot. And I think the expectation is that Xavier Watts is starting alongside Jesse Bates. And I always said, the marker of this defense and how quickly they could get these rookies into starting roles would be very important, because you do go out and you get Xavier Watts to be a starter alongside Jesse Bates. And you get Jordan Fuller as kind of this, okay, break glass in case of emergency. If we need a vet or Xavier Watts isn't coming along at the pace we want him to, and we need him to kind of sit out for a couple of games. But that's not the case. I think that they feel really good about where Xavier Watts is. I know he was working through an undisclosed injury at the tail end of last week, but that's not a problem right now. Raheem Morris said he's fine, ready to go. He was out of practice today. So I think that, to me, it signals that Xavier Watts is right where they want him to be, and it wouldn't surprise me if week 1 he is starting alongside Jesse Bates out the gate.
Yeah,
I think to kind of add to that, I feel like Xavier Watts is kind of like the ideal player profile that this defense is looking for. Jeff Ulbrich, to be more specific, Jeff Ulbrich's defense, because it just seems like ever since camp got started, there was an emphasis on getting after the ball. What I mean when I say that is because guys were going after it. They were poking that bad boy out. I think Drake London, was having some issues, and Mike Hughes had, forced 2 fumbles in that one particular practice. So when you think about it from that standpoint, when you're trying to establish a certain way or a certain mindset of playing defense, you got to bring in guys that can exhibit that, right? Even if you already have guys that can do it, because Jesse Bates is the ball guy. He's the guy that you sitting up in there in the third quarter, offense hadn't made a play, kind of middling around, defense haven't been making any plays or anything like that. You're like, all right, man, I need 3 to come through. I need him to kind of come here and make a play and try to give this team some life. And he's been that guy to do that for this team. So we have a young guy like Watts, coming back into the play, and like Tori mentioned, switching positions and then, getting drafted in the 3rd round in a position you've been playing for 2 years. That says a lot, and to be able to lead the country in taking the ball away from an interception standpoint, that says a lot. And I think that, with that, a lot of expectations are coming from people who understands that, right? But I think it has to be a process, because being a safety in the NFL is different from being a safety in college, because you have to know everything, especially when you have a guy like Bates on the squad. And coach even talked about it too, how Bates, everybody got their own iPad and everything, taking notes and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Bates got 2 of them things, and they're full of notes and full of, ideas. And, and when you hear a quarterback like Kirko talk about how when he has a conversation with Jesse Bates, you understand that he's different. And I think that, Watts would be doing himself a lot of favors if he kind of just mimic that. And when you think about the head coach talking about how the guy's just an adult, that lets you know that they got the right guy as far as a fit into what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and what Tori mentioned, he's only played a couple of years at the position. Well, you couldn't tell watching him on the football field, right? It looked like, from the jump, like, oh, this guy's been playing safety his entire life or whatever. And it's like, no, this is new. And that speaks to, I think a lot of the things that intrigue you about Xavier Watts, because for a long time, I've always felt that safety is one of those positions, a lot like quarterback, where a lot of it is mental. A lot of it is how you operate from the neck up. and it's the sort of intangibles and the gray matter and all that stuff that makes evaluating and football players really hard, because at the end of the day, you don't really know how to figure those things out when it comes to football players. And it's one of the reasons why quarterback is one of the hardest positions. And I think a lot of people also tend to think that safety is one of those positions that's difficult to evaluate. And I think, with Xavier Watts, it speaks to him having that plus ability to be able to transition quickly to the collegiate level. And you hope that leads to him transitioning quickly to the NFL level. And I think you're seeing that rise for him, and I think as we get closer to the regular season, it will become abundantly clear that he is going to be the starter next to Jesse Bates at some point, whether that's week 1 or week 4 or whatever. But I do think we will be seeing a significant number of games in this 2025 season where he's going to be getting a lot of run with Jesse Bates. And, all of these things are strong indications that, like, when, his number is called at whatever point that is, he's going to be ready for it. And so, yeah, I think all of this is very positive when looking at that trajectory. And hopefully, maybe it's not fair to put these expectations on him, but, there was a lot of hype on the Falcons bringing in Justin Simmons last year. And while Justin Simmons, I think, had a fine season, he didn't quite live up to the hype. And I think with the expectations being probably not the same for Xavier Watts because he's a rookie, I think there's less hype, but I think there's a good chance that he can come in and have a good season that maybe wind up better than what Justin Simmons wound up having for the Falcons, and add that piece to the Falcons secondary that they were looking for last summer, that they ultimately, I guess, didn't quite find with how Justin Simmons performed. And again, not trying to take shots at Justin Simmons, but I think Xavier Watts, in a lot of ways, his game is very reminiscent of Justin Simmons. Whether he winds up being, the all-pro safety that Justin Simmons was at the peak of his powers remains to be seen. But I think he certainly shows all the signs that he's on that trajectory.
Ooh, speaking of all-pro at the peak of his powers, there is a guy out there. The question becomes whether or not that guy should be a Falcon. We'll talk about that on the other side. Okay, Jarvis, I know the Falcons can't afford him. Jerry Jones said the request for trade is just, quote, part of the negotiation process, but you already know. If we didn't talk about this, our everydayers will be big mad because everybody's talking about it, right?
Yes.
Micah Parsons. In fact, I saw one particular graphic, no commentary around the graphic, just a graphic of all the teams in the NFL who should consider pursuing Micah Parsons. And there were 31 teams on the graphic. So that's including the Falcons. So that said, even if we're just doing it for kicks and giggles, got to ask you guys, and we already know the comment section is probably about to blow up. So here you go. Should the Falcons be one of those teams that takes a shot at going after Micah Parsons?
Yes. They definitely need to engage. But here's the thing. Once they start getting crazy, like, oh, yeah, throw in James Pierce Jr., oh, yeah, throw in Jalen Walker, I might have to hang up the phone, right? Because for me, I look at it from a standpoint of I'm real big on building stuff. It has to be a certain type of used car for me to kind of jump all in, right? Like, I don't have to drive a new car, but I feel like I understand what a new car is. I understand because I got it from day one. I've experienced that in my life. I've had a car that I bought brand new and I absolutely loved it because I knew exactly what I know what the maintenance on it. I put really good gas, the premium gas in that bad boy. So I understand that. So for me, I want to build something like, however, when you have a guy that's a really nice used Lamborghini, hey, I at least have to have a conversation about it, like, hey man, what you charge? What you want for the Lambo, Because especially that's a significant upgrade, but like there is a point where I'm going to cut off the conversation. I feel like if the Dallas Cowboys get to the point where they're going to trade him, because I don't think they're going to trade him.
Agreed.
If they get to the point that they're going to trade him, they're going to be asked for the world. And I would not be that team to give them the world just for Michael Parsons.
Yeah, and I think, Tori, there was a key word that Jarvis mentioned in there, building. So you have parts, you have building blocks with this Falcons organization, and you have to think about that. How many of the building blocks would you have to get away for the one block? And
Right.
you got to think about if that's even worth it, even for a Micah Parsons.
Well, to me, and this is not, apples to apples. This is kind of like an apples to orange situation where it's reminiscent of the Trey Hendrickson conversation and the Falcons going out and getting Trey Hendrickson. And the whole time I was kind of sitting there like, okay, you're selling the farm in that situation. You were selling the farm for like a loan year, like to finish out the contract, and how much you would have to give up just to even get him in the building, let alone staying for multiple years. And I wonder too about that with the whole Micah Parsons situation. It's like, what would a deal ultimately look like? And is it one of those things where you're selling the farm, you're selling these pieces, to your point, these building blocks for someone who's going to be here until like the end of the current contract that they're on?
Yes.
And so I think it's fair to Jarvis's point, like have the conversation, see what's up. Like it is, I mean, that's kind of what you're supposed to do. That's what this front office is supposed to do, is to have conversations. But I'm also in the same club of, okay, you can have those conversations, but I just don't think, I don't think it's going to materialize that he's even going to be, to y'all's point, that he's even going to be out of Dallas. Like, I think all of this is kind of just like a smoke screen, preseason, hoopla. Like, I don't necessarily buy into it all that much at this point in time. So that, and also too, as much as it is somebody who is somewhat of the generational talent and you love watching him play, I don't know what the benefit of doing that if you're having to move pieces that would help you potentially have sustained success later on.
Yeah.
And let's also be real too, that it's not like the Falcons have a lot of money to play with either, in terms of cap space. So according to what that is, unless you were to package a certain backup quarterback who's making up 14% of your salary cap at this point, maybe that's a different conversation. But
I like how you're thinking, Tori.
But that's pushing it way down the road at this point in time. So that's where I leave it. I'm not ready to jump on that train just yet. But hey, if something interesting comes up, say what I just said. Like I'm not gonna not hear them out. Like I'm not gonna sit there and be like, nah.
Yeah, I mean, yes, of course you trade for Micah Parsons if he's available, but he's not available. So this is purely a hypothetical thought experiment. And I talked about this on the most recent Lockdown Falcons, and I had some comments of people like, "Why are you talking about it?" Because what else am I going to talk about? Grayland Arnold for 30 minutes? Like, what else am I going to talk about? So, like, no offense to Grayland Arnold, but like, it's Falcons training is interesting, but it's not that interesting as much as talking about the potential one of probably the 5 best players in professional football potentially changing teams. And I think Tori nailed it, where it's just like you're going to probably hurt yourself long term by trading for Micah Parsons, given all the assets that you're going to have to give up to get him, the money that you're going to have to spend. But the whole reason why you would do that is because you believe that this is the single most important, most impactful needle moving move that you can make between now and in the next 2 years that is going to change the trajectory of this team, where you're not just looking at the Falcons being a team that, hey, we want to win the division. We hope we can win the division. It's like, no, we're definitely now winning the division now because we have Micah Parsons. And now all of a sudden we can do some real damage in January because we have Micah Parsons. And all of a sudden, all these other quarterbacks are going to be running for their lives because for the first time ever, and no shade at John Abraham, the Falcons have a true blue, no doubt about it, all-time generational, as Tori said, the generational talent of the last 5 years at the position. And so that's why you would do it. Obviously, given, expectations from ownership that, let's win. We want to win. We want to win now. We don't want to wait 3 years for this team to win, that's the incentive to do it. But obviously, it's all hypothetical because, as everybody has said, like, he's not leaving Dallas. This is all part, we've seen this with Lamar Jackson and Myles Garrett and Brandon Ayuk and all these other guys. Like, I request a trade, and then within 6 weeks, have a new contract. And if my time is about 6 weeks from now is the start of regular season, so Micah Parsons, is like, hoping, hey, let's see if fourth time's a charm when it comes to that sort of thing. So I think that's really what it's all about. But what else are we going to talk about? At this point in the summer. So let's talk about it.
Exactly. Let's just talk. And hey, it's one of those things where you can dream a little. What if it happened? What would it look like? I mean, you can have fun with it. It's the middle of the summer, like you said, so we can have fun with just about anything. Speaking of that, the 2025 Hall of Fame class has been enshrined in Canton. So now, of course, all eyes are on 2026. Former Falcon Todd Gurley will be among the players with first-time eligibility next year. So Jarvis, with his full body of work in the NFL, that of course includes more of a great run with the Rams and necessarily his time with Falcons, does Todd Gurley make it into the Hall as a first ballot selection, if at all?
I don't think he'll be a first ballot. I feel like he'll be considered. You're talking about a guy who had 3-time All-Pro, 3-time Pro Bowler, MVP. He got MVP votes in 2017. So when you think about it from that standpoint, I think he should be considered. But I'm like when people ask this question or about certain players, if I have to kind of hesitate or kind of think about it for a little bit, let me take another look at his numbers. They're not they're not a first ballot.
Yeah.
I just don't.
I absolutely agree with that.
So that's where I go with this. How if I have to kind of think about it, if I have to kind of remind myself, okay, what did he actually do? He's not first ballot Hall of Fame. Not saying he shouldn't get in, but it's definitely first ballot is like automatic, like Aaron Donald. He should be in the Hall of Fame right now.
We're going to do Breeze in this class this year.
Right. Yeah. Put him in now. Change the rules.
But no, I'm in the same boat. Like, first ballot, probably not, especially looking at the list. Like Drew Brees, Larry Fitzgerald, like
that's another one. Yep.
Right. Like Des Bryant, Julian Edelman. Like, there are some big time names, I think, in this specific grouping. And as much as y'all know, I was at Georgia when Todd Gurley was at Georgia. Like, that was electric. He's an electric player. But to the point of, I think what Jarvis is saying, it's like, if I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how many Pro Bowls he went to or, anything like that. And so, but I could tell you that Drew Brees changed the state of the New Orleans Saints franchise. Yes. And they haven't been the same at the quarterback position since. So I don't know. I think that there is an argument to be made eventually about Todd Gurley, but I don't know if that time is right now. And seeing kind of all the other names, I'm like, if I'm a voter, I'm voting, there's a few names that I'm voting above Todd Gurley, even though I have the highest of respect for Todd Gurley as a player and, his time with the Falcons, having, interviewed him, worked with him, all those kind of things.
And then you even look at free. It's not that it's always the case, but there are some situations where you look at not just the potential class and who's eligible, but then you start looking at the players eligible at a particular position. And so he's on the table. LaShawn McCoy's on the table. Frank Gore is on the table. And it may be numbers alone when you look at Gore, for example, that may make all the difference. So, yeah, it might be a tough ask, definitely for first ballot. But, yeah, it may take some time for Todd really to get that kind of consideration as you look at the guys who are already under consideration for 26 and just knowing some of the guys that may be coming in those years to follow.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you juxtapose him with Frank Gore, who was very good for a very, 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 very long time in the NFL. And like when you look at Todd Gurley, and to me, the interesting thing that Todd Gurley brings up when you talk about his Hall of Fame candidacy, and I echo the same sentiment as Tori and Jarvis with sort of questioning his ability to get in as a first ballot. But I think he brings up an interesting conversation that is going to need to be had about Hall of Fame running backs in particular over the next decade or so, because if you go back and you just look at all the other running backs that have been gotten into the Hall of Fame over the previous decades, they're all guys that played in the league with a couple of exceptions for like 10, 15 years, right? Yeah. And you have a couple of guys like Gale Sayers and Terrell Davis. And so I wonder if the Hall is going to make some adjustments, because like those types of careers, with Frank Gore being the obvious exception, just aren't that readily happening nowadays, right? Like Derrick Henry is like, I think going into like year 9, and like by modern NFL standards, Derrick Henry is like 100 years old, right? And like,
yes,
30 years ago, feels like he'd be in the middle of his NFL career and be like, I still got like another 8 years left of my prime to play football, based off of how running backs used to be utilized. And I wonder if that's going to help a guy like Todd Gurley, because I think the real case for Todd Gurley is when you look at like those first 4 seasons that he had with the Rams, where he was offensive rookie of the year, he was offensive player of the year, and then followed that up with that 2018 season when the Rams went to the Super Bowl and he was a big driving factor in that offense. Like, he's had his start of his NFL career was probably as good as any running back that we've seen in the last 10, 20 years. But then the injuries and the degenerative issue in his knee sort of caught up to him. And by the time he got to Atlanta, basically, like, he left Atlanta and has not sniffed a football field since, because he just wasn't healthy enough to do. And I wonder if Hall of Fame voters for the future with the Todd Gurleys will treat that 3 or 4 years that was arguably better than any other running back of the last 20 years. Will they give that extra boost just because in today's NFL, you might only get 5 or 6 years at your peak of your powers as a running back, as opposed to decades ago where you could rack up, production after 10, 12, or 15 years as a running back. And so I think that's going to be the interesting conversation that Todd Gurley, I think, is at the forefront of. And I think that's going to be a conversation that we're going to have a lot more about future running backs over the next decade as these players, in their careers. And we all look at them and say, yes, that player is the equivalent of what, I don't know, Walter Payton, or, maybe not Walter Payton, but you know what I'm saying? Like, the equivalent of some other previous Hall of Fame running back was in today's NFL, but he only played 6 years, and that other guy played 15 years. And are those things treated the same way, or are we not going to see really many more Hall of Fame running backs anymore, just because guys just don't have the longevity anymore that they once did at that position moving forward? So I think those are some of the questions surrounding Todd Gurley.
And then I was thinking too, Free, that in addition to those factors, the gaudy numbers that you have with receivers that are going to start going into the league as the league becomes so pass happy, in addition to quarterbacks that have even gaudier numbers than they used to have, and how maybe those numbers being scaled back, except if you are truly like a Derrick Henry or a Saquon Barkley, utilized the way they're utilized, but you're still very much a top tier running back. Like, how are those guys going to be evaluated relative to the gaudy numbers from these guys who are taking advantage of what the passing game looks like in the league this season? So it'll be interesting to see. But like you guys said, I don't know that I believe first ballot for Todd Gurley, but I definitely think he'll be in the conversation and may be in Canton someday. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Falcon Squad show your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked on Falcons with Aaron and his frequent guest analyst Jarvis as your second listen, and check out some of Tori's work at AtlantaFalcons.com. See you next time.